How you guys doing today? It's Anthony Ganji. Welcome to another episode of Tear Talk. Guys, we've been covering a lot on juveniles. You saw it when I did the A. Marie case or A. Marie case. If you guys haven't gotten a chance, please check out that video. That involved juveniles on the younger side, 8, 9, and 10. And what are we supposed to do with young kids who commit just such an atrocious act? And now this is on the higher end. This is about Jesse Mack Butler, who is just a very dangerous individual, and he's young. It came to my attention because I saw Ashley Banfield on News Nation cover this, and then all of a sudden it started popping up on my feed. And there is a lot of concerns with this case. So what I thought we could do today is bring a bit of an analysis to it. Let's go through it. Let's break it down. Let's answer some of the concerns. Let's go ahead and remove what's not fact, because some of the stuff that's out there is not fact. I had to double check a couple of things myself. And I think this will be a good show. And then later in the week, I will try to do a breakdown with Russ on the Kata Scott case. Kata Scott case is very interesting. I just want to see when, I know it's going to be when, they push for the murder charges. And when that's done, then I have my analysis, but that's going to be a very long show. I'm going to have Russ on. We're going to discuss it. There's a lot there. But there's something that case and this case has in common. Strangulation. People that strangle their victims, they only escalate. They are very dangerous individuals. It's just a pattern. I mean, I wouldn't be shocked if, sadly, Kata Scott was strangled. I wouldn't be shocked by that, because these are usually what's in their, what they enjoy: power, dominance, excitement. It's what turns them on. And someone as young as Jesse Mack Butler here, he likes to strangle. That turns him on. And people like that only become more dangerous. I think we have to realize that some people cannot be saved, nor is it our responsibility to save them. That's on them. At one point, we could try to help, but I think the hardest thing, but what must be done, is when you can't help them. And now it's strictly about what we need to do to protect society. And this is one of those cases. Okay, but I do want to show you that video from Ashley Banfield. It's a great video. She did a great interview here, so I would like to show that, and then I would like to go ahead and do the analysis that I have. So let me go ahead and share this. Okay, bear with me, guys. I'm going to mute my end.
Whatever else you happen to be doing this minute, if you're making dinner, if you're drying the dishes, if you're checking your email, stop. Stop and take a good, long look at the face that I'm about to show you. Pause your TV and make sure you get a picture. Take a picture of your TV, get a screen grab, and I need you to share it far and wide. This is Jesse Mack Butler, 18 years old. He's from Stillwater, Oklahoma. That's a college town. It is also home to, Oklahoma State University, right? And it's about an hour north of Oklahoma City. And back in March, when Jesse Mack Butler was 17, he was charged as an adult with a string of sadistic sex crimes against 2 girls. They were fellow students at Stillwater High School. One of the girls was choked unconscious and almost died, according to her doctor. Jesse Butler was charged with 10 felony counts in all, and it is very important you see the list. I think you'll get a picture of what happened when you see this list of charges. 2 attempted rapes, 3 charges of rape by instrumentation, and you'll have to use your imagination about what that means, but yeah, it is literal. 1 count of sexual battery, 1 count of forcible oral sodomy, 2 counts of domestic assault and battery by strangulation, and 1 count of domestic assault and battery. And while there were even more and way bigger charges that the state likely could have thrown at this kid, like attempted murder, The two alleged victims and their families had every reason to believe that the wheels of justice were hard at work on this case, both for them and for the accused, Jesse Mack Butler. And before I tell you what ended up happening, let me tell you why he faced those specific charges, what he actually did to those two girls. You should know that these details are extremely graphic. They are despicable, but they are critical to this story, especially when you find out how the judge came down in this case. So fair warning, trigger warning, what I'm about to list out for you is very uncomfortable to say and to hear. A police affidavit says a girl who's identified only as LS because she's a minor dated Jesse Butler for about 3 months, starting in January of last year. She was 16 at the time. And during that time, the victim said Butler repeatedly raped and attempted to rape her and would strangle her if she refused. The teenage girl needed surgery to repair the damage done to her neck by the strangulation. And her doctor told her that she would have died had that strangulation lasted another 30 seconds. The girl said that she gave in to Jesse Mack Butler because he threatened to kill her and he threatened to kill her family if she didn't give in. A separate affidavit says in March of last year, Butler took up with another 16-year-old girl identified only as KS. And that relationship lasted 6 months, but this teenager also said that Butler was aggressive and violent with her and says she went along with all the unwanted sex to avoid being hurt further. This victim also said that one time when she did refuse, Butler strangled her too. But get this, he recorded himself strangling her until she passed out. And lest you think this might be just a he said, she said, police later found that video on Jesse Mack Butler's phone. So that's what we call evidence. Jesse Butler pleaded not guilty to everything, as was his right off the bat. But in the coming months, for reasons that I will not pretend tonight to understand, the DA's office struck a deal with Butler's lawyers to change his status from adult to youthful offender. The victim's families begged the DA, please do not do that. Please, no. But in July, a judge decided to sign off on this. And in August, Jesse Mack Butler changed his plea from not guilty to no contest, meaning he knew there was ample evidence to convict him. And you should know that a conviction is the result of a no contest plea, right? That's what you get, convicted. By the way, I mentioned there were 10 counts before, but by August, there was one more. So the grand tally now stood at 11. The new count was for violating a protective order, which, oh my God, facing 10 felony counts and violating a protective order should have been a hell of a red flag for anybody, somebody. But the very same day that happened, Butler was sentenced to 78 years in prison, which sounds like a fitting punishment for somebody who nearly kills 2 teenage girls and rapes them repeatedly with all sorts of things.
Guys, we're going to break that down because I don't think that's accurate. It's just something I was going across the media. I don't think he was sentenced to 78 years. I think it was being put on the table. So I don't think he had yet been sentenced to that. I looked into that. That's why a lot of people think that he traded the 78 years for what would be 10 years. But I don't think he was sentenced for the 78 years. And we'll get to that. So just have that in the back of your mind. That may be something that was out there and it spread like wildfire. But then when I did my research, I couldn't find anything that confirmed him to being sentenced to 78 years. It just mentioned that it was kind of on the table. All right, let me play it.
But as a youthful offender, Jesse Mack Butler was also entitled to special treatment, like a rehabilitation plan, which was drawn up by the Oklahoma Office of Juvenile Affairs. And that plan was presented to the court last week. This new punishment called for daily check-ins, weekly counseling, a curfew, no social media, and 150 hours of community service. Bam. They really brought down the hammer, huh?
So I'm going to break that down so people understand what exactly that means. I looked that up as well. I don't think that really matches in the level of accountability to what he did, but it still is a measure that was taken. I'm not a fan of that. I would have liked to seen him tried as an adult, not a youthful offender. But with that said, I'll talk about what those measures really mean, what you have to be held accountable for if you are given those as a youthful offender.
50. Oh, that's like 3 weeks if you work really hard. This new plan is scheduled to stay in effect until Jesse Mack Butler turns 19. And that, my friends, is less than a year from now. So, wow, long punishment. Here's another kick in the teeth, if you're anybody other than Jesse Mack Butler or his family. If he complies with his court-ordered rehab punishment for that less than a year, and if he doesn't break any more laws, his record will be wiped squeaky clean. He won't spend a day in prison. His name won't appear on any sex offender registry, and nobody in other towns or other schools or universities or businesses or dating sites will have a clue as to who Jesse Mack Butler really is or what his proclivities have been. If you run a background check on him, again, thinking about dating him, hiring him, none of this is going to show up unless you maybe get my show. Maybe some of the online talk. That's why I suggested off the top of this show, grab a screen grab of that. That's the face. I mean, he's young. He's going to change, but that's him. Spread that far and wide. That's all you got, folks. That is all you have to protect your girls and protect yourself. And now I'm going to stop because I am livid, and I'm going to let Justin Shepard have a word here. He's a digital journalist whose online handle is Just in the Nick of Crime. He has been on this case from the beginning. And let me tell you, Justin, you have done some unbelievable digging, not just on the case itself, but the justice system and the players, not only the judge, but the judge's father and those involved. It sounds to me, and this is just a very sweeping comment, Justin, but it sounds to me like this is like the low country Murdochs and how they used to run justice in their neck of the woods. Am I off here?
No, you're not. In fact, it's funny you said Murdoch because I was talking about somebody else about this today earlier, and I said this is just like the Murdoch situation with how deep this goes. And yeah, normally when I get a story that comes across my desk and I'm like, okay, I'm going to talk about this one. And I'm like you, when I first saw this one, I was absolutely livid. I still am. And the next thing I knew, I had so many people reaching out to me about the way Stillwater, Oklahoma's judicial system handles things, the type of punishment that sex offenders get or lack thereof. And it goes much deeper than I would have even begun to have imagined.
So let me ask you this. Why no attempted murder charge? The doctor who treated the first victim who has the surgery scar from the welt and the intense swelling that continued after the strangulation, he said that if she was strangled 30 more seconds, she was going to die. Why was there not an attempted murder charge in this case?
That's a great question, and your guess is as good as mine. I mean, maybe perhaps at the beginning they felt they didn't need it with the other litany of charges that they had that they ended up, pleading down to, 150 hours of community service. But it seems to me when you've strangled somebody twice, to the point that one of them needs surgery, why that wasn't an attempted murder charge it's beyond me.
Is this kid in school with these girls? Because he's walking free. He is out there. Is he allowed to go to school with these girls?
So that's a great question. Right now, he's virtual school. So he is still enrolled at Stillwater High School. He is enrolled virtually. So he can't be seen with these girls or he can't go see them. However, it is my understanding from people close to the case, people close to some of the students at the school, that he is still texting, trying to hook up, asking if they're single, things like that. So it's like none of this meant anything to him. Like it's basically, hey, I got a slap on the wrist. This is a get out of jail free card. So I'm just going to continue to live my life with these minor inconveniences.
And that, I think, is the biggest issue. That's the issue you even see with the Marie case, the one we're covering out of Ohio, is that they're still free to roam around the neighborhood. So then the person that winds up living a limited life is the victim. They just don't feel safe. So I think justice has to have three components to it. Here, I think justice has to have three components to it. because, again, this is the concern here. I think justice should have accountability or punishment. Yes, that's part of doing something wrong, but it should also have rehabilitation should be part of that, because you need preventive measures, but you also need to know when those preventive measures are just not going to work for certain individuals. It's not our job to save them. It's their job to save themselves. Our job is to help facilitate change. And then the most important part, the anchor of it all. The anchor of it all is the healing for the victims or the victim's family. And you have to have all three. All three components must exist for justice to take place. And again, the anchor should be from the perspective of the victims or the victim's family. Okay, so let me get this back.
So during all of this, he allegedly is still trying to hook up with other girls at the school, presumably who know all about what happened to these two fellow classmates.
That's my understanding, yes.
Wow. I mean, I guess I should be surprised if he was violating a restraining order during all of this adjudication, during the fact that he was facing 78 years in prison. He still decides to violate a restraining order?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think we would be remiss if we didn't talk about a big elephant in the room here, which is who Jesse Mack Butler really is. So his father is a man by the name of Mack Butler. And if you Google him, he will show up as a former athletic director or director of football for Oklahoma State University, for OSU, which is a pretty big job. He worked at one point for LSU. He's been with several universities throughout bowl games, and then he was hired on at Stillwater High School as an athletic director. And if you look at the news article from when he was hired, the whole town knows who this guy is. Like, a name that well around town is now coming to Stillwater High School. So this is a family that is very well connected to the Stillwater area. For a college town, a football town, you can't get much higher than somebody who is involved in the athletics, which his father is.
Let me ask you this. Justin, how about this? The judge in this case, Judge Susan Worthington, I read your Substack about all of the figures in the justice system, and it did not sound good. They are extraordinarily lenient. Their track record looks as though it's like sexual deviance. Oh, wow, whatever. A lot of the sentences, a lot of the bail has let sexual offenders run rampant in this community. First, I think this judge, second, her father ahead of her. Tell me if I've got that wrong. But did Judge Susan Worthington here on your screen, was she also connected to the offender's dad at OSU or through any of the athletics programs?
So this is all, unconfirmed speculation or rumors, I could say, based on what I've heard, is that she and her dad, whose name was Don Worthington, and the two of them, I think it's worth noting, have kind of ran the bench in Stillwater, the judiciary, for about 50 years. So the two of them have kind of been, over everything. And it's my understanding that both of them, the father and now the daughter, Judge Susan Worthington, are very much involved with OSU athletics, whether it's as donors, whether it's as supporters. That's just kind of what I've been told.
What's the recourse here? I got about 20 seconds left. There's got to be something that these families can do.
The only thing that you really have as far as reopening the case is if the DA decides to do that. I believe that's Laura Thomas. And based on what I've started to learn about her, that's highly unlikely. The only other thing that these families could do is probably sue the Butler family legally, given the fact that Jesse was under 18 at the time. That would possibly make the parents liable. But that's kind of the most you're going to be able to do, other than make sure that his face is everywhere. Because once, like you said, he turns 19 years old, this is wiped clean. So all we're going to have is a Google search.
It's just unfathomable. We just had the list of charges up on the screen again, Justin. It's just, again, 11 charges, 10 of them extraordinarily violent. He pled to them. This is not allegations. This isn't he said, she said. These things happened to those girls, and 150 hours of community service and a couple of check-ins, and no social media is all he's going to get. It just doesn't seem like this is America, if that's the kind of justice that these families are going to get. Stay on this.
All right. So, guys, we do have a lot to cover here today. Basically, I'm learning with you guys. I do some research. I try to make it as accurate as possible, but we have a community so we can help fill in the gaps. But I do believe this will give us a strong foundation going forward. That's the key. And then again, I'm going to do one for Kata Scott next. And I also did one for the D4VD case. If you look at it, I think it's titled, like, in the picture, you'll see, will he be charged? Or why hasn't he been charged? Let me just show you guys, because that's a good one too. We do these detailed analysis, and then it kind of just gives us a good foundation. It says, why no arrest? That's another good detailed one. They're a little longer, but it gives you a lot of things up front that I think kind of get us ahead. So this is what we got. So what do the records show? So looking at the affidavits, background, initial charges. So on March 5th or 6th, 2025. So he was 17 at the time. That means in 2020, that means his birthday, because when he said no contest, he was 18. So his birthday is somewhere after March, and obviously before he took that plea. So he definitely will turn 19 in 2026. That's extremely important to know. All right. And this is good, as I said, for us to learn, because then it just gives us a strong foundation. So, okay, so on March 5th or 6th, or 5th through the 6th, 2025, Jesse Mack Butler, age 17 at the time, was charged as an adult in Payne County, Oklahoma, with multiple serious felony offenses stemming from allegations made by two female victims, both students at or affiliated with Stillwater Public Schools. Butler was also a student at Stillwater High School during the time these crimes allegedly occurred throughout 2024. The complete criminal charges right now, there was 10, there's now 11. He was ultimately charged with 2 counts of first degree attempted rape, 3 counts of rape by instrumentation, digital forcible penetration, 1 count of sexual battery, 1 count of forcible oral sodomy, 2 counts of domestic assault and battery by strangulation, 1 count of domestic assault and battery, and 1 additional count for violation of protective order, which came later. And guys, when you violate a protective order, that's the trust you have in the legal system to do what they can. But when that protective order gets violated, that's bad, because that's an attempt from the legal side to put something out there that's not being respected. And I have a feeling that also shows a level of obsession. I've read cases where they've had people that have stalked individuals. They put the protective order, and then the sad thing is when they find the body of the person that's been assaulted or killed, they have the protective order on them, or the protective order has already been filed. It's just not enough. Butler was initially sentenced to. All right, so now this is not correct here, guys, and we're going to fix this, but bear with me, because it says he was initially sentenced to 78 years on August 25th, 2025. And then it goes, but this sentence is suspended pending compliance with the Youthful Offender Rehabilitation Plan. But then when I kept on looking for a sentence, it just wasn't coming up. So then I just want to clear that up. I think this is what it should be. Butler was sentenced to 10 years on August 25th, 2025, not 78 years. That's what I saw, which by the way, the 10 years is suspended pending compliance with the Youthful Offender Rehabilitation Plan, which I'll explain. Multiple sources do report that the court sentenced Butler to 78 years on August 25th, but this appears to be referring to the maximum theoretical sentence he could have faced if all counts were run consecutively as maximum penalties. So remember that. These wouldn't have been run concurrent. These would have been run consecutively. So when the news is running with the 78 years, they're kind of putting one sentence after the other, after the other, after the other. So it would equal to 78 years, where technically it also could have ran concurrent, and maybe that could have equaled the 10 years. But to be honest with you, you got 2 separate victims. They should have all had their each justice. So most likely it probably would have been done at some level of it being consecutive. But with that said, it was theoretical. I don't think he was actually sentenced to the 78 years. However, the more reliable sources, KOCO, citing the Oklahoma State, clearly states Butler will remain subject to the sentence ordered on August 25th, 2025, which was 10 years. That means if he violates anything from this youthful offender program, he'll have to go to state prison for 10 years. Now, this is a significant factual error that I had to figure out through researching. The difference between a 10-year suspended sentence and a 78-year suspended sentence is enormous in terms of what consequences he faces for noncompliance, seriousness with which the court took the charges. So I know Ashley had said, yeah, it's crazy to go from 78 to 10 and all this other. Well, I don't know if she mentioned the 10, but 78 to this supervision program. But again, the 78 was theoretical. Do I think he deserved that? Yes. I'm not arguing that. I'm not minimizing what he's done. I'm just providing information. The accuracy of claims about what he avoided. Now, all right, we talked about that. Okay, so let me go back to where we were. Sorry, but I just want to make sure we got that. And I may have to say that again as we progress. Just to keep it in line, because when I did the original research, it was still showing up as sentenced to 78. And then as I was watching somebody, I was like, this doesn't make any sense. How does it go from 78 to 10? So then later research showed that I couldn't find where he was actually sentenced to 78 years. Okay, so let's go to the first victim, Jane, or LS. Obviously LS because she's a minor. You'll see that in the police reports. So the first victim, and this is the relationship timeline that I got. The first victim identified in court documents is Jane, or LS, dated Jesse Butler for approximately 3 months, starting in January of 2024 when she was 16 years old and Butler was 17. So it gives us a bit of a timeline for his age. So the pattern of sexual violence, coercion, and guys, take note of strangulation. That's extremely a concern. That's someone that will be very, very dangerous. This is a behavior that usually gets escalated, and I'm going to note that. I'm also going to note preventive measures, all this stuff. I got a lot of stuff here. So during this 3-month period, the victim reported that Butler repeatedly raped and attempted to rape her and would strangle her if she refused his sexual advances. According to the school resource officer, his report, the victim said she would always tell him no, but he would get aggressive and hurt her until she said yes. The affidavit noted in the incident involving the girl, Jesse Butler demonstrated escalating physical and sexual violence as their relationship progressed over the term of approximately 2 to 3 months. Specific incidents is documented. There's a fast food restaurant incident. Court documents indicate that the first incident of abuse occurred off school grounds at a fast food location. And then you have the house sitting incident. And this is the critical strangulation event. Earlier in 2024, while the victim was house sitting, Butler came to the house. When she tried to stop his sexual advances, he became angry, came up behind her, put his arm around her neck, and strangled her to unconsciousness. She tried to get away, but could not free herself. That comes from KOCO News 5. The arrest warrant also indicates the victim was strangled a second time that same week, and that Butler told her he wanted to strangle her so he could film it on his phone. So you got premeditation there as well, guys. By the way, it's premeditation. He wants to film it. So this is not incidental. It's premeditation. And by the way, strangulation, that's about control, dominance, arousal, excitement. So the OSU wrestling event, there's another event with her. After attending an OSU home wrestling duel on February 2nd, 2024, Butler attempted to rape the victim inside his vehicle while she was yelling no. An unidentified woman walked up to the vehicle and interrupted him. After this, Butler drove away from the area, told the victim, her, to stay down, and warned her if the police came that they would both be in trouble. And this comes from 1600 Kush. It'd been good if the person that would have saw it would have took the girl out. You know, I wonder if she tried. It'd be interesting to interview her and say, hey, when you heard her say no, did you take her out? You know, let people figure it out later, call the police or something? Or did he just drive away? Did she report it? So threats and intimidation. The victim alleged she gave in to Butler's demands because he threatened to kill her and her family if she didn't comply. Got that from News Nation. In her victim impact statement, she revealed Butler threatened to kill her, her family, or himself if she told anyone about the abuse. Now, I want to talk about the medical injuries and near-death experience. You saw the injuries in the video. So the severity of strangulation injuries. The teenage victim had to undergo surgery on her neck to repair damage caused by the strangulation. The doctor told her that she was 30 seconds away from dying when Butler strangled her. The victim stated that her neck scar will remind her of the violence she suffered for the rest of her life. According to the victim's mother, Her daughter recently underwent surgery for injuries doctors said were directly related to strangulation. The mother said her daughter's damaged veins continue to swell and cause pain, serving as a physical reminder of what Butler did to her. Photos from the hospital confirm she was treated for complications consistent with strangulation trauma. And I believe this came from the Substack from the gentleman that we saw Ashley Banfield interview. This comes from the victim's own words. In her victim impact statement to the court, she said, "I need you to remember that what happened to me wasn't only abuse or strangulation. It was nearly attempted murder. So I ask that you hold him accountable to the fullest. 30 more seconds, and this would not be my statement. It would be my mother's, because I would not have survived. I survived what he did, but I will never be the same." And again, the physical evidence of violence, both students, we're going to go to the next event because there's two victims here. But I just want to mention both students expressed fear of Butler and said they bled from being sexually assaulted. The victim reported it would hurt, and it resulted in a lot of bruises on her legs from Butler. Now, I want to talk about the second account, detailed accounts from the affidavit. Second victim is Sarah or KS. Here's the relationship timeline here. Second victim identified as Sarah or KS. Now, mind you guys, this is escalating. It's escalating. And they're young. So if you look at the history of people that tend to be serial killers, they grow into it. This is the time when they try it out. The second victim, identified as Sarah or KS, began dating Butler in March 2024, shortly after her 16th birthday. And the relationship lasted approximately 6 months, ending in September of 2024. The affidavit states this relationship began after Butler and the first victim ended their relationship in March of 2024. Guys, you also see this in the Kata Scott case with Keon King. It's like, not to put it out there, but you could see it in the reports as a failure to hold these people accountable and protect the victim. He also liked to strangle, but then he also had 2 other victims prior and eventually got the best of Kata Scott. So these are people that kind of feel like they're trying until they succeed to get that ultimate feel. And maybe, to be honest with you, it doesn't tell you why he turned himself in, because he did turn himself in, Keon King, and we'll discuss it. But he could have turned himself in because it could be many reasons, but because maybe he did what he wanted to do, and now he's done. The thrill is gone. Okay, so Sarah reported that Butler was aggressive and violent with her, and that she went along with unwanted sexual advances to avoid being hurt. During a forensic interview on September 25th, 2024, the victim detailed ongoing physical and mental abuse, stating Butler was often physically and mentally abusive and sexually assaulted her on numerous occasions. Now, this is one of the incidents that were documented. It's the drive-in restaurant incident, April 22nd, 2024. Butler attempted to pull the victim's pants down and touch her as they sat on the bed of his pickup truck at the drive-in restaurant. She told Butler no, but he continued to grab and slap her buttocks and touch her breast. Butler then became angry, grabbed her arm, spun her around, and threw her to the ground. This action left scratches on her arm, which Butler laughed about. This incident demonstrated to the victim that Butler would use physical force on her if she did not comply with his sexual demands. So remember, the first victim was a fast food restaurant. Second victim here seems to be a drive-in. The second one is the film strangulation incident, August 1st, 2024. So this is perhaps the most disturbing piece of evidence in the entire case. When the victim refused Butler's sexual advances, he strangled her and recorded himself strangling her until she passed out. There's premeditation there. Detective Rachel Bruce obtained a search warrant for Butler's cell phone and located a video with the date and timestamp of August 1st, 2024, 8:28 p.m., in which Jesse Butler can be seen strangling her until unconsciousness. Police later found that video on Butler's phone. By the way, there is the premeditation, but there's also, don't tell anybody or I'll kill you. So this person knows exactly what they're doing. Trust and believe. Additional sexual violence. In addition to forced oral sex, the victim reported Butler also aggressively digitally penetrated her and that it caused her to bleed. Escalating pattern across victims. The affidavit is noted in that investigation, Butler employed similar strategies to elicit cooperation from the victim, including strangling her until unconsciousness for refusing to have sexual intercourse with him. So it's escalating. How the case came to light. So initial reports to school officials. The 2 victims reported the crimes to Stillwater High School officials in late 2024. School resource officer Paul Blankenship stated in his report that he talked with the two female students on September 12th of 2024. Then you got the police investigations. Court records indicate this wasn't Butler's only victim, noting it was the second investigation Stillwater police have on Butler for similar crimes against another female victim. All right, so in this case here, let me just get my point. Hold on one second. Let me clear that up a little bit. Okay, so wait. So September 12th, the two victims reported the crimes to Stillwater High School official in late 2000. It's September 12th. School resource officers Paul Blankenship stated in his reports that he talked with the two female students on September 12th, 2024. Remember, guys, I'm getting this from multiple articles. Okay, so then September 20th and September 25th, 2024, each girl interviewed separately at the Seville Center, Child Advocacy Forensic Interview Center. And then police filings make clear this is two separate victims, not one. Okay, good. So court records indicate, there's two, just interviewed at separate times. So both victims underwent forensic interviews at the Seville Center in September of 2024. September 20th and September 25th to be exact. Okay, so they reported it on September 12th to the police resource officer. Guys, remember, I'm learning this as we go, and I'm trying to get the facts straight. And then they were interviewed separately on September 20th and September 25th. That sounds better. Okay, so they reported to the Stillwater High School official, which is Paul Blankenship, and then he, I guess, sent it over to his superiors, and then by September 20th and September 25th, they had interviewed both girls at the Seville Center. Okay, so what was the evidence here? The police investigation yielded crucial evidence. Video footage from Butler's phone showing him strangling the second victim until she lost consciousness. Medical records documenting strangulation injuries requiring surgery, and hospital documentation of vein damage and ongoing complications, and photographic evidence of injuries. So I noticed an 8-day delay. So they reported on September 12th, but then the first interview doesn't happen until September 20th. So there is mandatory reporting from the SRO. So when the girls disclosed to Stillwater High School staff, the school resource officer was notified the same day. And then the SRO then reports to Stillwater Police and DHS, which is Child Protective Services. Let's see if we can figure out what's going on with this 8-day, because I'm sure some of you guys are going to have that question. Referral to CAC, which is the Child Advocacy Center. So in Payne County, forensic interviews are usually conducted at the Seville Center for Child Advocacy. That center schedules interviews with specially trained staff, and then coordination needed. So because two victims came forward around the same time, law enforcement, DHS, prosecutors, and Seville Center had to coordinate dates. CACs often have limited interviewers and balance multiple urgent cases. So why could there have been 8 days scheduled at the Seville Center? CACs aren't on demand. It often takes days to line up an interview. Advocate and police observer. Now that's an area that should be strengthened, because that delay bothers me. So that's an area of concern, I think. Age and school obligation with teenage victims. Interviews are usually set at times that won't overlap with classes, tests, if possible. I figured that would be secondary. Let's get the kids safe. Medical clearance of strangulation or assault injuries needed medical evaluation first, and we know one victim required hospitalization. Interviews are sometimes delayed until the child is stable. Investigative prep. Police and prosecutors sometimes wait to collect preliminary info. Text, social media, Butler's phone before the forensic interviews so they can tailor questions. But I wonder why, if during this delay, do they do anything with the school to make sure they no longer have interaction with the kid? Would Jesse Mack Butler be told, hey, you can't go to school, but you can go ahead and we'll Zoom. We'll do something through video conferencing or something. But right now you can't go to school until we can figure this out. I wonder if they do separate, because you really shouldn't move the victim in an effort to protect those making the allegation. Maybe there even could be some type of protective order. I don't know. But that 8-day delay to me is a concern. Trauma-informed timing. Some CACs intentionally give victims a few days before the formal forensic interview to reduce immediate re-traumatization. Okay, so the 8-day gap is not unusual in CAC practice, but it can look troubling to families who want immediate action. Defense attorneys sometimes attack this timing. Why didn't you interview right away if it was so urgent? And prosecutors counter that waiting for a controlled forensic setting protects the integrity of the child. Disclosure makes it admissible in court. So in short, the delay wasn't likely negligence. It was part of a standard child advocacy protocol, scheduling medical clearance and ensuring a trauma-informed, legally sound interview. I'm just wondering, during that delay, what's being done to at least minimal separate the girls from the boy? Was he still allowed to go to school? That's a good question. If you guys could figure it out, that would be a great help, because I don't think I have that here. Let me see. Let me check one more thing. Okay, so I can't confirm if this happened, but they said there is policies in place. So here's how school and law enforcement usually manage the situation. Immediate safety plan. Once the girls disclose, school officials and SRO would have put a no contact directive in place, keeping Butler separate from the victims on campus. Protective oversight. Victims are often given schedule changes, escorts between classes, or alternative arrangements to avoid contact. And law enforcement watch. Even before charges were filed, Stillwater Police and DHS were notified, so the case was live. He was being watched while the forensic interviews were scheduled. So yes, he probably could still attend school, but the primary safeguard was no contact order and internal school safety planning until the formal investigation and charges move forward. Okay, so hopefully that answers the gap. I wonder if that was done, but it looks like there's something in play for that. So that's a good thing to discover. So the legal proceedings, timelines, and outcomes. So March 2025, the initial adult charges filed. Butler was initially charged as an adult and arraigned on March 6, 2025, before Payne County Special District Judge Susan Worthington, who ordered him to have no contact with his alleged victims. Butler remained free on a $25,000 bond. What's your thoughts on that amount? Judge Worthington denied Butler's request to be certified and charged as a juvenile. Okay, so that wasn't mentioned by Ashley. They wanted to push juvenile, and she denied it. She denied that. So that's important to know, because that shows an initial effort to do something, get some level of accountability. So she did deny Butler's request to be certified, but again, that wasn't mentioned. But then there's the shift to youthful offender status. So Butler was charged as an adult. His status was later changed to youthful offender. So I know on the surface it could look like the judge softened up, but I said it's actually procedural. At the start, Butler's defense tried to get him certified purely as a juvenile, which the judge denied because the charges were too serious. Later, the court allowed him to be classified as a youthful offender, which is different from juvenile court. It's a hybrid track, so it's both juvenile and adult. He's still under adult jurisdiction with an adult sentence hanging over him, but supervised by the Office of Juvenile Affairs until age 19. So the judge wasn't reversing course. She drew a line between full juvenile, too lenient, and useful offender, a compromise that still leaves the adult sentence in play if he violates. And again, the adult sentence wasn't 78 years. It was 10. All right, so that's interesting. Butler pleaded on August 25th, 2025. Butler pleaded no contest to the 11 charges against him, which means he neither admitted nor disputed the charges. That may actually help him out, as the guy said, for civil lawsuit. The court sentenced Butler. Okay, this is wrong. The court did not sentence Butler 78 years. So it's my older research. Let's get back to that. So again, he has a rehabilitation plan. So remember, he was sentenced to 10 years, which was suspended. And this is what he has to do instead. And he has to be in compliance with this. If he's not compliant, then he could be sent back to do the 10 years. So the 78 years, which was really showing up, that's not what it was. And that was hard to discern because everybody was posting up 78 years, and how did it go down to 10? That wasn't explained. So I try to fill in the gap, and that's where it said that he was never sentenced to 78 years. Now, if someone knows different, please add to the comment, because that's interesting. The rehabilitation plan details. So the youthful offender plan, drawn up by the Oklahoma Office of Juvenile Affairs, calls for daily check-ins, weekly counseling, a curfew, no social media, and 150 hours of community service. The plan will stay in effect until Butler turns 19, and that's less than a year from the sentencing date. The state and consequences. So if Butler complies with this court-ordered rehabilitation for a year and doesn't break any more laws, his record will be wiped clean, meaning an avoidance of prison or an appearance on any sex offender registry. That's an issue, I think. That's a definite issue, especially because he's escalating. The court extended jurisdiction to Butler's 19th birthday. He's now under and subject to the oversight of the Office of Juvenile Affairs pending his compliance or non-compliance with the orders of the court. Now, he does have another court appearance coming up on December 8th, but that's just to basically see if he's in compliance. And the court will decide if he's not in compliance to either violate him, depending on what he did. If it's a small thing, it may be something progressive. But if it's a big thing, then they violate him and his suspension gets lifted and he has to serve his 10 years. So recent proceedings following a disposition hearing on Monday, which was on October 7th, it was determined Butler would not face prison time, but was sentenced to community service, counseling, and supervision, and the 10 years over his head. Butler's next court appearance is scheduled for December 8th of 2025. So now I want to go to the victim impact statements. This was powerful. The first victim statement. One victim said in her impact statement, "I've had to explain bruises, explain silence, explain why I started isolating from people who love me. You didn't just strangle me with your hands. You strangled my voice, my joy, my ability to feel safe in my own body." I think that's powerful because I heard that also with the A. Marie case. To break someone's boundaries at such a young age, the trauma that must be. And this statement powerfully captures the total violation experience, not just physical violence, but the destruction of voice, autonomy, joy, and basic sense of safety. The mother's statement, that's Amber Salvi, so she's the mother of the second victim. A mother of one victim stated, "As a mom, I never thought I'd have to watch my daughter fight this kind of battle while the system made excuse after excuse for the person who hurt her." Remember, the family, and we'll get to it, the family wanted the adult sentence, and that's actually in the next section, and they feel betrayed. Amber Selby, the mother of one of the victims, said the fight for justice wasn't just about her daughter. She spoke about her daughter's strength, but highlighted that the reason she had to learn to be stronger than her peers was because of Butler's abuse. Selby said their family did not agree with the deal Butler received because it was in his best interest, not the victim's. It's time for accountability, Selby said. Not just words, actions. Our kids deserve that. And that seems to be the argument now, right? As I'm watching these things, it looks like the victim really has no rights. It's all about the person being charged. And it makes sense because they're the ones going through the system. They're the ones that are getting the loopholes by the defenders. And then the poor victims have to just sit there and they're the ones that are handcuffed. Community response and broader context. So public outrage. So parents in Payne County expressed significant outrage after learning Butler's status was changed to youthful offender despite the serious charges. The case prompted significant viral social media activity, that's how I saw it, with families of victims saying the system failed them and calling for harsher penalties. So the allegations of systemic issues, some reporting has raised questions about whether Butler's family connections may have influenced the outcome. Now, guys, this is all rumor mill. Okay? But worth exploring, though. At the time these assaults took place, Butler's father, Mack Butler, served as the assistant athletic director for Stillwater Public School, a position that connected him directly to the city's education and sports network. According to several residents familiar with the matter, the Butlers are deeply woven into Stillwater's civic and social fabric, with connections allegedly extended into the school district, local politics, and the judicial system itself. After initial reports on Jesse Butler's sentencing, messages began flooding in from Stillwater parents and residents saying this isn't new, this is how it's always been. The case has been characterized as exposing decades of systemic leniency, favoritism, and alleged corruption where powerful names walk free and victims are left to pick up the pieces. Now, important note, these allegations about systemic corruption and favoritism come primarily from one source. That was a Substack article, and I think the person that wrote that article was the gentleman we saw on Ashley Banfield's show. And should be treated as claims requiring independent verification rather than established facts. All right, let's go to the key legal and ethical questions this case raises. So I'd like to ask questions, love your thoughts on some of these answers. When should youthful offender status apply? The central dilemma. The Oklahoma youthful offender system is designed to provide rehabilitation opportunities for young people who commit crimes before age 18. However, this case forces us to confront whether there should be exceptions for crimes involving extreme violence. Hold on. So again, near lethal strangulation in this case. Premeditated action, filming, assaults, making threats, that's all premeditated. Pattern offenses across multiple victims, escalation. And crimes demonstrating sophisticated manipulation and control. Do this or I'll kill you. Do this or I'll kill your family. do this or I'll kill myself. Question for reflection. So should strangulation, which research identifies as a strong predictor of future lethal violence, automatically disqualify someone from youthful offender status? Does the presence of video evidence, Butler filming himself strangling a victim, suggest a level of calculation that warrants adult prosecution? And when there are multiple victims showing an escalating pattern, does that change the calculus? Then you have the medical evidence problem, the severity standard. Medical professionals told the first victim she was 30 seconds from death when Butler strangled her. Now, this is not hyperbole. It's a medical assessment of how close she came to being murdered. So, some more questions. Should near lethal violence be treated differently than other juvenile offenses in determining youthful offender eligibility? Does the need for surgery and ongoing medical treatment for vein damage constitute a severity threshold that should trigger different legal handling? And what message does it send to victims when someone who nearly killed them receives a rehabilitation plan rather than incarceration? And then you got the video evidence issue. Perhaps the most disturbing aspect of this case is that police found video on Butler's phone showing him strangling a second victim until she lost consciousness. So why does this matter? The act of filming suggests premeditation and control. Possession of such a video could indicate intent to use it for blackmail, humiliation, or future sexual gratification. Creating such content demonstrates a level of detachment and callousness that raises questions about rehabilitation potential. That's the scary part. And questions for reflection. Does filming oneself committing violent sexual assault suggest a different level of culpability than crimes committed in the heat of passion or moment? And should this creation of what is essentially child sexual abuse material, given the victim's age, be treated as an aggravating factor? And I got to mention the pattern of escalation. The affidavit documents that Butler employed similar strategies across both victims, including strangling her until unconsciousness for refusing to have sexual intercourse with him. This wasn't a single incident or mistake. It was a repeated pattern of behavior. Similar tactics used across multiple victims, escalating violence within each relationship, and systemic use of threats, physical force, and strangulation as tools of coercion. So questions for reflection. Does a pattern of predatory behavior across multiple victims suggest rehabilitation is less likely to succeed? And should the justice system weigh single incident offenses differently from pattern offenses when determining appropriate intervention? And I think that plays out in the Kata Scott case too. That's going to be a long discussion. I think I'm having Russ come on with me on that. I just want to wait, as I said, wait for the charges to get pushed. Victim rights and justice. Selvey said, again, the second victim, this is the mother. Selvey said their family did not agree with the deal Butler received because it was in the best interest. It was in his best interest, not the victim's. The victim's perspective, both victims expressed that they were not adequately consulted about the plea agreement. The outcome feels like the system protected the offender rather than them, and the lack of incarceration sends a message that what happens to them wasn't serious enough. The victim's family reportedly begged the district attorney not to accept the youthful offender arrangement, but in July, a judge signed off on the accord. So here's some questions for there too. What role should victims have in plea negotiation involving violent crimes? How can the justice system balance rehabilitation goals with victims' needs for safety and sense of justice? Again, you got accountability, rehabilitation, healing, and healing being the anchor. Is there a way to implement youthful offender programs that feel more just to victims? Now, the public safety concerns. Butler's rehabilitation plan includes daily check-ins, weekly counseling, a curfew, no social media, and 150 hours of community service lasting until he turns 19. Here's the timeline problem. Butler will be under supervision for less than 1 year. That's what I think. That's my math. I don't know exactly when his birthday is. I can't even find it. If he complies for 1 year, his record will be wiped clean, and he won't appear on any sex offender registry. That's a concern. Because then if they commit later crimes, these are the things they look back at and say, man, we could have done something. Well, this is the time to do it. And he'll be 19 years old legally. He'll be 19 years old, legally an adult with no criminal record. So some questions here for reflection. Is 1 year of supervised rehabilitation sufficient to address the pattern of behavior documented in this case? 2 victims escalating. Should offenders who commit near lethal violence be exempt from record expungement regardless of age? And what are the public safety implications of someone with this documented history having a clean record and no sex offender registration requirement? That's the scary part. The almost problem in criminal justice. I had to put this in here because he could have killed them, but he didn't. And that's kind of, I feel like, an argument that the defense puts in. You want to push it's attempted murder. How do you know that? How do you know his intent? How do you know he wanted to murder her? Because he tried to strangle her. How do you know he wanted to murder her? But he almost did. Almost isn't good enough. And that's the crazy part. Almost is not good enough. So this case highlights a troubling pattern where system sometimes treats almost murdered very differently from murdered. The victim said 30 more seconds and this would not be my statement. It would be my mother's because I would not have survived. The primary difference between this being a rape assault case versus a murder case was 30 seconds. The victim's survival was not due to Butler's restraint, but due to chance timing. So should criminal justice outcomes depend so heavily on luck, whether a victim survives, rather than the offender's actions and intent? It was lucky that she survived. And how should the system account for violence that nearly causes death, even if death doesn't occur? So what should be done? So I got this for prosecutors and district attorneys. And again, I'm always having the center of the victim. I think this is what a good thing about having this channel is I want to try to be a voice for the victim, see if we can create changes. And I think this had some areas that we can discuss that are relevant. And I also think the same with Kate Scott. When it comes to harassment and stuff, I think there's areas that we can discuss there. So long as we're going to try to create impact. Maybe there's spots here for petitions to get things heard. So if you're watching this, take some notes. And if there's stuff for petitions, put it out there. Make that voice. Because at the end of the day, it's always going to be about the victim. Always. So you need to enhance victim consultation protocols, implement mandatory victim consultation processes before accepting youthful offender plea agreements in violent cases, provide victims with detailed explanations of what youthful offender status means in practice so they know what they're agreeing to or not agreeing to, and create formal mechanisms for victims to present their perspectives to decision makers. I mean, directly to the decision makers. I like how in the case of Scott, you had someone from the 9th District being that voice. Severity thresholds for youthful offender eligibility. Consider establishing clear criteria where certain aggravating factors, near lethal violence, multiple victims, pattern offenses, creation of video evidence, create a presumption against youthful offender status. I mean, here, look at that. My big thing, all these things are big things, but that pattern offenses. Require written justification when such factors are present, but youthful offender status is still pursued. So again, if you're still going to do it, the victim should know why, and you should have a justification. Transparency in decision-making. Publish annual data on youthful offender status determinations, including the types of crimes, aggravating factors, and outcomes. I mean, it's very secret with juveniles, but maybe that's a concern that we need to expose because we have really no idea of what's really out there in the community right now because these records are protected. Provide public accountability reports on compliance rates and recidivism among youthful offenders. So we know what's working, what's not working. For judges and courts, just a suggestion, robust compliance monitoring, ensure youthful offenders plans include intensive supervision, not just minimal check-ins. Implement immediate consequences for noncompliance rather than allowing multiple violations. And consider extending supervision period in cases involving serious violence. So even though it's till he's 19, can we go past 19? Maybe to 25? I don't know. I mean, if you're not going to lock him up, can we do a little more on the other side? So enhanced rehabilitation requirements, mandate specialized treatment for sexual offenders, not just general counseling. Require participation in programs specifically addressing domestic violence and power control dynamics, and include victim empathy and accountability components in rehabilitation plans. Regular progress reviews, schedule frequent court appearances to assess compliance and effectiveness of interventions. I think that's the December 8th court appearance. Require detailed reports from treatment providers about progress or lack thereof, and be prepared to revoke youthful offender status if rehabilitation is not occurring. And for legislators and policymakers, review and reform youthful offender status. Consider creating exclusions for certain categories of violent crimes. For example, near lethal assaults, pattern sexual offenses, crimes resulting in serious permanent injury. Examine whether current age thresholds, crimes before 18, are appropriate for serious violent offenses, and review whether 1 year supervision periods are sufficient for complex cases. And you got to strengthen the victim's rights. It's their protection, So codify victim rights to be heard in youthful offender determination processes, create victim advocate positions specifically for juvenile youthful offender cases, and ensure victims receive trauma-informed support throughout proceedings. Address the record expungement for victim offenses. Consider whether automatic expungement is appropriate for offenders convicted of violent sexual offenses, even if committed as juveniles. Examine sex offender registration requirements. Should youthful offenders convicted of serious sexual violence be exempt? And create tiered approaches based on offense severity and documented rehabilitation. It's a spectrum. It's not a one-size-fits-all. You got to get into that muddy water. Improve data collection and research. Mandate collection of data on youthful offender outcomes, recidivism rates, and victim satisfaction. We talked about that. Victim satisfaction. Got to add that. Fund research on which rehabilitation approaches are most effective for different types of juvenile offenders, and use evidence to guide policy rather than assumption. And for schools and educational institutions, enhance training for school personnel. Train teachers, counselors, and administrators to recognize signs of dating violence among students. I wonder if anybody takes that. Is that a course for teachers? Because they're right in the heart of it. Ensure school resource officers receive specialized training in trauma-informed interviewing for sexual assault cases, and create clear protocols for responding when students report abuse. Prevention and education programs. Implement comprehensive healthy relationship education starting in middle school. Include specific content on consent, coercion, and the dynamics of abusive relationships, and teach students about strangulation dangers and how to seek help. Sometimes you want to protect kids from the dangers of this world by keeping them out of the loop, but sometimes they have to know, because as much as you try to protect them, they're going to get exposed. And then the support system for victims. Ensure schools have dedicated victim advocates or counselors trained in sexual assault response. Create safety plans for victims who report abuse by other students, and provide ongoing support even after legal proceedings conclude. For treatment providers and rehabilitation programs, specialized programs for young sexual offenders. Develop evidence-based interventions specifically for adolescent sexual offenders who use violence. Focus on accountability, not just rehabilitation. Offenders must understand and accept responsibility for harm caused, and include long-term follow-up beyond initial supervision period. Then you got to have the risk assessment and management. Use validated risk assessment tools to evaluate likelihood of reoffending. Develop individualized treatment plans based on risk level and specific criminogenic needs, and be prepared to recommend revocation of youthful offender status if risk remains high. You can't be afraid to recommend that. And it's not a failure if you can't get to that person. And hopefully it's not seen as a failure. It's not a numbers game here. It is what it is. You don't want to, it's not about vanity. It's I can't get to this one. Why? Because I can't. It's just not working. And I shouldn't have to be afraid to say that. Success comes from also recognizing that the person will not change, not just changing them, because changing them, that's success. It's an impossibility sometimes. And you're putting the onus of that success on the counselor. It's not up to me. It's up to the person I'm trying to help. I'll give them my best, but at the end of the day, my job is to give you a decision of whether they're good or not. Their job is to take the change or not. Victim awareness components. Ensure rehabilitation includes substantive work on understanding victim impact. Avoid approaches that minimize offender responsibility or blame victims. That's the first thing when it comes to change. What are you doing? Did you take onus of what you did, or who are you blaming? And measure success not just by compliance, but by genuine attitude and behavior change. And for community and public education, you need accurate public information. Media outlets should provide clear, accurate information about what youthful offender status means in practice, explain the difference between no jail time and no consequences. Supervision, restrictions, and suspended sentences are consequences. Again, not minimizing, but we got to know the system so we know what we're arguing against or for. Help public understand how the juvenile youthful offender system works, and then combat misinformation. This happens a lot. Social media platforms should provide context labels for viral posts about ongoing legal cases, encourage responsible sharing, verify information before amplifying it, and create community forums where justice system officials can explain processes and answer questions. And that to me matters because there's always going to be questions. And the broader conversation about justice, facilitate community dialogues about how to balance rehabilitation and accountability. And again, healing. I want to add healing to that. Discuss what justice means for victims of violent crimes. Okay, that's the healing part. And consider restorative justice approaches that center victims' needs while still addressing offender rehabilitation. And for victims and families, and again, this is for comprehensive support, ensure victims have access to trauma-informed therapists specializing in sexual assault and intimate partner violence. Intimate partner violence. And you really need to get that going because this is a trust that they need to have in relationships. Stuff like this at such a young age could mess with their ability to trust later on when they want to have relationships that are more serious and could lead to a great life with a family and children. But you destroy that now, and they may question every relationship later on. It destroys what could be a great life. Provide legal advocates who can explain proceedings and protect victims' rights, and offer support groups where victims can connect with others who have had similar experiences. And the long-term follow-up, don't abandon victims after legal proceedings conclude. Provide ongoing check-ins and support as victims continue healing, and ensure victims know how to access resources if they need them months or years later. And the empowerment of voice, create opportunities for victims to share their stories if they choose, to educate others and advocate for change. Involve victims in policy discussions about how the justice system handles similar cases, and respect victims' autonomy in deciding how they want to engage with the legal system and public discourse. Now, why this case matters. There's a reason why this case is getting national attention. It's going to deal again with juveniles. I mean, is it really as complex as we're making it? Or is the answer a lot more simple? We're just making it more complex. So the national context is this case is not occurring in isolation. It reflects broader tension in the American criminal justice system. Again, we saw it in the A. Marie case as well, too. So the juvenile justice reform movement, there's been significant national momentum towards treating young offenders differently, recognizing that adolescent brains are still developing and that young people have greater capacity for change. This movement has been driven by neuroscience research on adolescent brain development, evidence that harsh adult sentences for juveniles often backfire, creating more hardened criminals, recognition that the U.S. historically incarcerated juveniles at higher rates than necessary, and success stories of rehabilitation programs that reduce recidivism. So it looks like rehabilitation at the forefront, but it's really about rehabilitation and safety and accountability. They partner. So it's safety and security, in my mind, should come first. And when that's provided, then true rehabilitation occurs. It should not be the other way around. And that gives respect to the victim. That's where the healing starts. Because they know that what happened was serious enough and they feel respected when, you hold somebody accountable. They feel safe. The victim's right movement. Okay, so there's a movement for victim rights. Simultaneously, there has been growing recognition that victims' voices and needs must be centered in criminal justice processes. Victims should have meaningful input in plea negotiations and sentencing. Justice should feel just to those harmed, not just satisfy abstract legal principles. And public safety requires taking violence against women seriously. This case positions at the intersection. So Butler's case sits squarely at the collision point of these two movements. So it involves a young offender, crime at 17, who theoretically should benefit from rehabilitation-focused approaches, but also involves extremely serious violence, near-death experiences, documented patterns, and video evidence suggesting calculation. And victims and their families feel the outcome doesn't adequately acknowledge the harm done to protect them. So that's the latter. And then you got the gender dynamic. This case also raises important questions about how gender intersects with criminal justice. Violence against women. So both victims were teenage girls in relationship with Butler. The violence included sexual assault, rape, and intimate partner violence, which is the strangulation. And research consistently shows that non-fatal strangulation in domestic violence situations is one of the strongest predictors that the abuser will eventually kill the victim. Look that up. I say that again. Research consistently shows that non-fatal strangulation in domestic violence situations is one of the strongest predictors that the abuser will eventually kill the victim. They have control of your life. Breathe. Don't breathe. breathe, don't breathe. It's a thrill. But they have total control, total dominance. The pattern of control. The affidavit described classic patterns of intimate partner abuse. Isolation, so victims withdrawn from friends and family. Escalation, violence becoming more severe over time. Threats, threatening to kill victims, their families, or himself. Using force to coerce sex. And filming documentation as a form of ongoing control. Now, questions about how the system treats gendered violence. Would the outcome have been different if the violence wasn't embedded in romantic relationships? I mean, I'm sure were you guys dating? Does it matter? I'm sure that was asked. But does it matter? Does framing this as a teen dating violence minimize the severity compared to if it were labeled serial sexual assault and near murder? Does the dating itself minimize it and how it's seen? That's a good question. Strangulation deserves special attention because research shows it uniquely dangerous. What research shows? Non-fatal strangulations is a significant predictor of future homicide and domestic violence cases. Victims of strangulation are 7 to 10 times more likely to eventually be killed by their abusers. 7 to 10 times. Strangulation causes serious injuries, brain damage, stroke, respiratory damage that may not be immediately apparent. And many strangulation victims minimize the severity because they survived. Why this matters for Butler's case? Butler strangled at least one victim until she was 30 seconds away from dying, according to medical professionals. He strangled the second victim until she lost consciousness and filmed it. Told the first victim he wanted to strangle her so he could film it on his phone. This suggests Butler views strangulation not as an unfortunate escalation in a moment of anger, but as a deliberate tool of control and even entertainment. The technology factor, the presence of video evidence in this case raises few questions that didn't exist in previous generations. The video as evidence. Police found video on Butler's phone showing him strangling the second victim until unconsciousness. This is not just testimonial evidence. It's Butler literally documenting himself committing a felony. And the video is part of the crime. Butler told one victim he wanted to strangle her so he could film it. That's premeditation. This suggests filming was part of his motivation, not just documentation. The video itself becomes a tool of ongoing psychological control. Victims know, and the victims know it exists. Think about that. Think about that. He's got the video. And now the victim knows he has that video. Questions this raises. Should creation of video, photographic evidence of violent crimes be treated as an aggravating factor? Does possession of such material suggest ongoing risk, potential to share, use for blackmail, sexual gratification from reviewing it? And how should the digital nature of modern crimes influence rehabilitation and rehabilitation approaches? And here's how we're coming close to the final reflections, guys. I did try to cover a lot. So here's what the core question is. At the heart of this case is a fundamental question. What does justice require when a 17-year-old commits violent sexual offenses, nearly kills multiple victims, films his crimes, and shows a pattern of predatory behavior? This is no easy answer because legitimate values are in tension. The case for rehabilitation focused approaches, right? So Butler was 17 when he committed these crimes. His brain was still developing. Neuroscience shows the prefrontal cortex, responsible for impulse control, judgment, and considering consequences, doesn't fully mature until mid-20s. Research demonstrates that young offenders have higher capacity for change than adult offenders. Harsh adult sentences for juveniles often fail to reduce recidivism and may actually increase it by exposing young people to hardened criminals. The goal of the justice system should be to prevent future harm, and if rehabilitation can achieve that better than incarceration, it serves everyone's interest. And even serious young offenders have successfully been rehabilitated and gone on to become productive, nonviolent adults. But what about the case for adult-level accountability? What's that side of the argument? The severity of the violence, near-lethal strangulation, rape, filming assault suggests this goes beyond typical adolescent poor judgment. Multiple victims and escalating patterns indicate this wasn't a single mistake, but deliberate, repeated, predatory behavior. The premeditation involved, threats, filming, systemic coercion, demonstrates a level of calculation that undermines claims of adolescent impulsivity. Medical professionals determined one victim was 30 seconds from death. The only difference between this being a murder was luck. Victims have a right to see meaningful consequences for the profound harm inflicted on them. Public safety may require longer-term interventions than 1 year supervision period. And the existence of video evidence documenting the crime creates ongoing risk that the material being distributed. So what both sides get right? So we have two opposing arguments here, one geared for rehabilitation, one geared for accountability, not punishment, accountability. What both sides get right. And guys, when you see prison, I don't know a lot of people thought the word prison, it's accountability. That's what it is. Because accountability partners with the safety aspect. Then you get the rehabilitation and the healing. So what the rehabilitation advocates, so what both sides get right. So for rehabilitation sides, age matters and young people can change. Let's agree to that. Not all, but some. Purely punitive approaches often fail to make anyone safer. We all agree with that. I mean, prison systems now are supposed to be about reform, rehabilitation. But it's not its primary function. It's a partnership function. Primary function will always be safety and security. Destroying a young person's entire life may not serve society's long-term interest. Okay, yeah, but my argument there would be they could have destroyed someone else's. I'm not really too concerned with that because that's making them a victim. I'm not too concerned with that thought. That's not going to make me I don't want that too much in my head because then what's going to happen is then my choice to do right will be manipulated by emotion as seeing them as the victim. I can't allow that. So I'm not 100% with that thought right there. And the criminal justice system should be forward-looking, preventing future harm. I get that. And not just backwards-looking, punishing past acts. Okay, but it's a combination of both. Prevention does come with accountability because there's a level of ownership that comes with true change. You cannot create change in oneself if you don't own what you have done. And that comes with accountability. Now, accountability advocates are right that not all juvenile crimes are equal. Near-lethal violence is qualitatively different from property crimes or even typical fights. Victims deserve justice that feels meaningful, not formulaic, or not written by formula, I guess. Application of age-based policies and patterns of predatory behavior raise serious doubts about rapid rehabilitation, and public safety requires careful assessment, not automatic leniency based on age alone. The problem with current outcomes, the controversy in Butler's case stems from the perception that the outcome satisfies neither set of concerns adequately. And that's kind of where I always tell people we got to find where the middle ground is. And I'm telling you, the middle ground is accountability, rehabilitation, healing. But so we would want, rather than the binary choice between adult prison and minimal juvenile supervision, a more nuanced approach might include, this is where the middle road is. Again, we would like to see more, but right now it's not where we're at, and they may not allow us to get to that extreme of locking them up. But with that said, that doesn't mean that there's not stuff in the middle. It's not, all the way on this side of the spectrum, all the way on this side. Maybe it's somewhere in the middle. So maybe extended intensive supervision rather than 1 year supervision lasting several years, potentially until age. Why don't we do something potentially at age 25 when brain's development is complete? That would be a good idea. Intensive oversight, including multiple weekly contacts with supervision officers, electronic monitoring if appropriate, strict limitations on contact with potential victims. Got to really monitor that. And immediate responses to any violations. And then you want the specialized evidence-based treatment, not just general counseling, but specialized programs for adolescent sexual offenders. And the treatment addressing should be sexual offense-specific cognitive distortions, power, control, and respect for others' autonomy, healthy sexuality and relationships, violence prevention and anger management, substance abuse if relevant, regular evaluations of progress by independent experts, and treatment continuing as long as needed, not just during supervision periods. And then you want your meaningful accountability components, right? So we also want this in there. Restorative justice processes where victims can voluntarily participate if they choose, required victim impact awareness work, community service specifically addressing violence against women, public acknowledgement of responsibility to the extent legally appropriate, and restitution for victims' medical expenses, counseling, and other costs. And then the graduated consequences, clear immediate consequences for noncompliance. Graduated response system, minor violations result in increased restrictions, serious violations or new offenses trigger adult sentence. No automatic expungement. Instead, a demonstrated pattern of rehabilitation over years before records are sealed, and judicial review at multiple points to assess whether the youthful offender approach is working. And the long-time sex offender registration should be modified. Rather than complete exemption, a modified registration requirement appropriate for the seriousness of offenses. Registration could potentially be removed after extended period of demonstrated rehabilitation, but public safety requires some mechanisms for tracking individuals with documented patterns of sexual violence. Victim-centered processes, meaningful victim input at every stage, not just pro forma notification. Ongoing victim services and support regardless of legal outcomes. Mechanisms for victims to be heard if they disagree with proposed resolutions, and transparency about why decisions were made, especially when they differ from victims' preferences. And then the transparent oversight, public reporting on youthful offender outcomes, compliance, and recidivism. We need to know more. What's out there? We need to know more. If you got juveniles committing these types of crimes, the public needs to know. Independent review of cases involving serious violence to ensure decisions are sound. Community education about what youthful offender status means in practice, and mechanism for victims and public to raise concerns if supervision appears inadequate. Why this matters beyond one case? Because the Butler case is receiving national attention, not just because of its specific facts, but because it represents a larger questions American society is grappling with. How do we treat young people who commit serious violence? So we're in a period of transition. For decades, the U.S. treated juvenile offenders very harshly, trying children as adults and imposing life sentences, even for crimes committed at young ages. Research and advocacy led to recognition that this was counterproductive and unjust, but the pendulum may have swung too far in some cases. While most juvenile offenders deserve and benefit from rehabilitation-focused approaches, cases involving near-lethal violence, multiple victims, and predatory patterns may require different responses. And how do we center victims while still allowing for redemption? One of the most painful aspects of this case is the testimony of victims and their families feeling dismissed, disbelieved, and treated as obstacles to the real goal of rehabilitating the offender. One victim said, "You didn't just strangle me with your hands, you strangled my voice, my joy, my ability to feel safe in my own body." A mother said, "As a mom, I never thought I'd have to watch my daughter fight this kind of battle," while the system made excuse after excuse for the person who hurt her. When victims feel this way, the justice system has failed at one of its core functions, providing a sense that society takes their suffering seriously and will act to prevent future harm. Yet we must also grapple with the reality that Butler is himself very young. If he were 27 instead of 17 when he committed these crimes, there would be no question of adult prosecution, but he was 17, and that matters, even if it doesn't excuse the harm he caused. Finding approaches that honor both truths, that victims deserve meaningful justice and that young offenders have capacity for change, is difficult, but it's necessary. And I mentioned that one of the shows I did, I think it was the last show I did on the Marie case so far, is I talked about you have to see two truths. And that's where you have to work from. How do we address violence against women and girls? I want to put that in because it does matter. This case also reflects a broader societal question about how seriously we take violence against women and girls, particularly in the context of intimate relationships. Research shows that teen dating violence affects 1 in 3 adolescents in the U.S. Non-fatal strangulations is a major predictor of future intimate partner homicide, and many young people lack education about healthy relationships, consent, and the dynamic of abuse. Are we teaching that in school? Just curious. When cases like Butler receive what appears to be lenient outcomes, several concerning messages may be sent. Sexual violence against teenage girls isn't as serious as other crimes. Violence within relationships is somehow less serious than stranger violence. And boys, young men who commit these crimes are victims of their own immaturity rather than responsible agents. And that's, again, when it's seen as more lenient. These messages can discourage other victims from reporting, embolden other offenders, and perpetuate cultures where such violence is tolerated. So you give him a lenient sentence. What's that say to others who may be on the cusp of doing the same thing? What's that say for those who need to report stuff? I mean, they're watching. The two girls had a lot of courage to go to the SRO, but people are watching, both potential aggressors and victims. And the outcome matters. How do we balance transparency with privacy in cases involving minors? Another tension in this case involves public information. The public has legitimate interest in understanding how serious crimes are handled. Victims have rights to privacy and protection from re-traumatization. Offenders, especially juvenile offenders, have privacy interests that may aid rehabilitation, and misinformation flourishes in the absence of accurate official information. The viral social media attention to the case demonstrates both public engagement, people care about justice, and the problems with trial by social media, rumors, unverified claims, and harassment. Finding the right balance between transparency and privacy is challenging, but critical for public trust in the justice system. Sometimes you got to wait. You put stuff up too fast and there's no context. And then people make their own context in the moments of ambiguity. So I do want to address the claims of misinformation. Given the viral nature of this case, it's important to address specific claims circulating on social media. So there's a Butler avoided 78 to 80 years in prison. The assessment partially accurate, but we went over that. It was 10 years. I think that was just something brought to the table. It said Butler's walking free with no consequences. I want to be fair. I try to cover both sides. It's not that he has no consequence, just not the consequence we'd like to see. So it's sort of misleading, but still not the best. But to be fair, Butler's rehabilitation plan includes daily check-ins, weekly counseling, a curfew, no social media, and 150 hours of community service. These are consequences and restrictions on his freedom. However, it's accurate to say he's not incarcerated and will not serve prison time if he complies with the plan. Whether these consequences are sufficient given the severity of the crimes is a matter of legitimate debate, but claiming there are no consequences is factually incorrect. So again, when we pose our arguments, we have to pose from the truth. So again, I'm not happy with those, but there are consequences. Butler's athletic involvement got him special treatment. That's unverified. I found no credible evidence in court documents or news reports that Butler was involved in athletics or that any athletic status influences treatment. I mean, I know there's a picture, so he could have had some involvement, but I didn't see any confirmation on that. However, there are reports that Butler's father, Mack Butler, served as assistant athletic director for Stillwater Public Schools and that the Butler family has deep connections to the community. Whether these connections influenced the outcome is alleged but not proven. Such claims require careful scrutiny and should not be stated as facts without evidence. So again, I'm not saying it's not there, but just can't say it is there either. Systemic corruption in Stillwater led to this outcome. That's alleged, but also unproven. Some reporting has characterized this case as exposing decades of systemic leniency, favoritism, and alleged corruption. You saw that with Ashley Banfield, where powerful names walk free and victims are left to pick up the pieces. These are serious allegations that deserve investigation, but they remain allegations. The outcome of Butler's case could be explained by a legitimate application of youthful offender laws, prosecutorial decisions based on evidence and legal considerations, and systemic favoritism or corruption. So it could be on all three, but you can't just automatically jump to that conclusion. Without thorough investigation, we cannot know which explanation is correct. Making definitive claims about corruption without evidence is irresponsible, but raising questions and calling for transparency is highly appropriate. So you can ask, hey, was this really about utilizing youthful offender? Is this about the decisions made by the prosecutor? Or is this really about favoritism and corruption? And the questions I have left for ongoing discussion, which I believe, and then we have our final thought. So these are the questions that we have left for ongoing discussion. Kind of like wrapping it up now. Sorry, guys, it's a lot. As this case continues to unfold with the next hearing scheduled for December 8th, and again, that hearing is really just to make sure he's in compliance. Here are critical questions that stakeholder, policymakers, and community members should consider. For immediate case, what does compliance with Butler's rehabilitation plan actually look like in practice? Who is monitoring his daily check-ins and weekly counseling? What happens if he misses a check-in or counseling session? Is he receiving specialized sex offender treatment or general counseling? How is his progress or lack thereof being measured? What protections are in place for the victims? Are no contact orders being enforced? Do the victims know if Butler violates any conditions? What supports are victims receiving as they heal? Can victims request additional restrictions if they feel unsafe? What happens at the December 8, 2025 hearing, which I believe is to see if he's in compliance? Will the court receive reports on Butler's compliance? Will victims have opportunities to address the court? What criteria will the judge use to assess whether the youthful offender plan is working? What happens when Butler turns 19? Does supervision simply end? Will his record truly be expunged with no sex offender registration requirement? Will there be any long-term monitoring or follow-up? And what prevents him from committing similar crimes once supervision ends? For policy and reform, should Oklahoma youthful offender statute be reformed? What's your thoughts? Should certain violent crimes be excluded from youthful offender eligibility? Should supervision periods be longer for serious offenses? Should automatic expungement be eliminated for violent sexual offenses? Should there be mandatory sex offender registration even for youthful offenders? How can victim input be meaningfully incorporated? At what stage should victims have formal input opportunities? How much weight should victim preferences receive in plea negotiations? What happens when victims strongly oppose proposed resolutions? How can the system avoid re-traumatizing victims while still gathering their input? What role should medical evidence play in sentencing decisions? When medical professionals determine a victim was 30 seconds from death, should that trigger specific legal consequences? Should injuries requiring surgery be treated as aggravating factors? How should long-term medical complications factor into sentencing? How should the justice system handle video evidence of crimes? When an offender films himself committing violent crimes, should this be treated differently than crimes without such documentation? Does possession of such material create ongoing victim harm? Should creation of such evidence be an automatic aggravating factor? What does effective rehabilitation for adolescent sexual offenders look like? What evidence-based programs exist? How long do such programs typically need to be effective? What are realistic expectations for behavior change in 1 year versus longer periods? And how can we measure whether rehabilitation is genuine versus superficial compliance? You know, it's funny, we talk about manipulation all the time. I got books on manipulation. They make Manipulation Decoded. Also another book on boundary. Look me up on Amazon, you'll see some books, but you have to be wary because people know how to manipulate the system, even at that young age. So for community and prevention, this is for us. How can schools better prevent and respond to teen dating violence? I specifically put teen dating violence because I don't know, when they ask, hey, what you guys dating, does that minimize things? I don't know if that's in the mind of anyone when they decide to do this. What education should students receive about healthy relationship and consent? How can schools create environments where victims feel safe reporting? What support should school provide to victims who report abuse? How should schools respond when both victims and perpetrator are students? What role does community culture play? Are there patterns of protecting certain families or individuals in Stillwater? How can communities balance supporting young people with holding them accountable? What prevents people from speaking up when they know about abuse? How can bystanders intervene safely and effectively? How should we discuss these cases publicly? How can media report responsibly on cases involving minors or young adults? What responsibility do social media users have to verify information before sharing? How can we have productive public discourse without vigilantism, being a vigilante or harassment? And how do we balance public interests with privacy concerns for victims and offenders? And the broader questions for the justice system is, when does age stop mattering for criminal responsibility? Is 18 the right line for adult versus juvenile treatment? Should different types of crimes have different age thresholds? How should neuroscience about brain development inform legal policy? Can we have nuanced approaches that account for both age and offense severity? What is the purpose of the criminal justice system? I like the definition of accountability, rehabilitation, and healing. I want to put all three in there. Is it primarily to punish past wrongs, to prevent future crimes through deterrence, to rehabilitate offenders, to provide justice and healing for victims, to protect public safety first? Can one system serve all three goals, or are they inherently in tension? And I don't think they are. How do we measure justice? Is justice achieved when an offender is punished, when a victim feels heard and validated, when future crimes are prevented, when an offender is rehabilitated, when community safety is enhanced, or is all of the above? So my final thoughts. And then the conclusion. So my final thoughts here, the path forward is the Jesse Mack Butler case forces us to confront uncomfortable truth. Truth number one, our current system often fails both victims and the goal of preventing future harm. When victims and their families say the system made excuse after excuse for the person who hurt her and expressed that the outcome was in his best interest, not the victim, we must take that seriously. The justice system that victims perceive as unjust has failed at a fundamental level. Yet simply incarcerating more young people for longer periods has also been shown to fail. Let's be fair, be objective. It often creates more hardened criminals without making anyone safer. Not all juvenile crimes are equal. That's number two. That's truth number two. There's vast difference between a teenager shoplifting, getting in a fight, or even committing burglary versus a teenager who repeatedly rapes and sexually assaults multiple victims, strangles victims until they lose consciousness, brings the victim within 30 seconds of death, according to medical professionals, films himself committing these crimes, and threatens to kill victims and their families. Age-based policies that don't account for these differences risk being both unjust to victims and ineffective at preventing future violence. Truth number 3, rehabilitation is possible, but not guaranteed and not always rapid. Some young people who commit serious crimes do change, but that change typically requires genuine acknowledgement of responsibility, not just legal compliance, ownership, intensive specialized treatment over extended periods, development of empathy and understanding of victim impact, changes in thinking patterns, not just behavior, because behavior is superficial. It's on the surface. I want to know what you think, how you justify your behaviors. Are you doing it just to comply, or are you doing it because you believe it's right? Internal motivation or internal inspiration. Ongoing support and accountability. Whether 1 year of daily check-ins, weekly counseling, community service can achieve this kind of transformation is a question that deserves serious scrutiny. Truth number 4, the case is bigger than one person. Jesse Butler is an individual whose actions harm specific people. But this case also represents how society treats violence against women and girls, how the justice system balances age with offense severity, how victims are centered or not in criminal proceedings, how communities respond to uncomfortable truths about local institutions, and how media and social platforms shape public understanding of complex legal issues. The resolution of Butler's case will send messages, intended or not, about all these broader issues. And that's a goal of why we do these dialogues. Truth number 5. I mean, if you get a chance to create change, you should go for it. Perfect justice may not exist, but better approaches do. No outcome in this case would satisfy everyone. Some will always believe Butler deserved adult prison time. Others will believe that as a 17-year-old, rehabilitation should be the priority, regardless of offense. But surely there are better approaches than what appears to have happened here. Victims feeling unheard and reporting. They begged officials not to accept the arrangement. A 1-year supervision period for someone convicted of 11 felonies, including a near-lethal violence, and that violation of that protection order. Automatic expungement and no sex offender registration after minimal compliance. So I'm wondering, when they had that violation of no protection order, as I'm thinking about, I wonder if he had to have been contacting the victims after it was already reported. And that's a problem. That probably, I should have picked that up earlier. Because I'm sure once they reported, they put the protection orders in place, and then he violated after that. I should have picked that up. I'm assuming that's what it is. I think you guys would agree to that. Then you have the automatic expungement and no sex offender registration after minimal compliance, lack of transparency about what specialized treatment, if any, is being provided, and no clear long-term plan for monitoring or preventing future offenses. What healing might look like for the victim in this case, justice might include genuine acknowledgement from Butler that he caused terrible harm, assurance that he's receiving intensive treatment, not just minimal supervision, knowledge that if he violates conditions, there'll be real consequences, support for their own healing, including therapy, medical care, and community support, changes in policy so future victims don't experience what they did, and having their voices heard and respected by the justice system, feeling safe in their own community. Guys, I mean, it's good to keep note of all this too, because what about if he decides to get married one day and have children? Is this someone that we want near kids? For Butler, rehabilitation might include taking full responsibility for his actions without minimization or excuse, understanding the profound harm he caused to specific human beings, developing empathy and respect for others' autonomy and boundaries, addressing whatever factors, attitudes about women, need for control, distorted thinking contributed to the crimes, making amends to the extent possible, committing to never committing such acts again, and becoming someone who contributes positively to society rather than harming others. And for community, healing might include honest examination of whether local institutions fail to protect victims, reform to prevent similar failures in the future. I'll be honest with you, in the Kata Scott case, there's a blame game going on there too. And that sucks, because when you have blame going both ways, there's no onus. And sometimes when you got to solve a problem, you got to look at it from every angle. So instead of blaming each other, what can we do better as a team? So again, reform to prevent similar failures in the future. education about teen dating, violence, consent, and healthy relationships, support for both victims and prevention efforts, rebuilding trust in justice system institutions, and productive dialogue about how to balance accountability and rehabilitation. So the work ahead, as it is writing today, Butler's case remains open with a December 8, 2025 hearing schedule. But again, I think the hearing is compliant. So I don't know if it's really still open, unless you want to count this year of supervision. Between now and then, and in the month and years that follow, several things need to happen. So you have the immediate monitoring, rigorous oversight of Butler's compliance with the Youthful Offender Plan, regular evaluations of whether rehabilitation is actually occurring, immediate consequences for any violation, and continued support and protection for victims. The systemic evaluation, investigations of whether there were any improper influences on prosecutorial or judicial decisions. I guess you're going to have to look into it because it's being pushed by the public. Review of whether Oklahoma's youthful offender statute is being applied appropriately, assessment of whether victims' rights were respected throughout the process, and examinations of what role, if any, family connections or community status played. Maybe the family could appeal the decision, maybe bring it to a higher level. Everybody has oversight. Policy reform, consideration of whether youthful offender laws need modification for cases involving serious violence, development of better mechanisms for victims' input in plea negotiations, enhanced training for prosecutors and judges on trauma-informed approaches, creation of specialized programs for adolescent sexual offenders, and reform of expungement and sex offender registration policies. And the prevention efforts are enhanced education in schools. We talked about this, about healthy relationships and consent, better training for school personnel to identify and respond to dating violence, community awareness campaigns about teen dating violence warning signs, and support services for young people in abusive relationships. It would be good to see if someone wants to start that, a program about teen dating. I don't know if that's done. Someone could pioneer that. Truth and transparency, public reporting on youthful offender outcomes and recidivism. We need to know that in the public. We need to know what's around us, especially for children like this, juveniles like this. Clear communication about why decisions were made in this case, mechanisms for community input on justice system policies, and combating misinformation with accurate, accessible information. And the final part, guys, this is the shortest part. Conclusion, justice deferred or justice denied. The title right here, question is deliberate. Is the youthful offender approach in Butler's case justice deferred, meaning that accountability and rehabilitation are happening just differently than traditional adult sentencing? Or is it justice denied, meaning that the outcome fails to adequately address the harm caused, protect public safety, and provide meaningful accountability? The answer may depend on what happens next. If Butler genuinely engages in rehabilitation, takes responsibility for his actions, completes intensive treatment, and never commits another violent act, then perhaps history will view the youthful offender approach as successful. Rehabilitation achieved, but punishment might not have. Got to be fair, got to be objective. Butler merely complies with minimal requirements, receives a clean record after 1 year, and the intensive treatment and behavior change needed don't occur, then this will be seen as a profound failure. Justice denied to victims and public safety compromised. If victims continue to feel unheard, unsafe, and traumatized by the process, then regardless of what happens with Butler, the justice system will have failed them. The unfortunate reality is that we won't know which outcome emerges for some time. And by then, if the wrong choice was made, it may be too late. Butler will have a clean record, no restrictions, no oversight. One victim said, "You didn't just strangle me with your hands. You strangled my voice, my joy, my ability to feel safe in my own body." The justice system's obligation is to help restore that voice, that joy, and that safety. Whether the current approach accomplishes that remains an open and urgent question. What is certain is this: the Jesse Mack Butler case demands that we do better. Better at protecting victims, better at genuine rehabilitation. I said genuine rehabilitation. Better at transparency, better at balancing competing values, and better at ensuring that justice is both done and seen to be done. The victim in this case deserved better. Future potential victims deserve better. And if we believe in both accountability and redemption, then all young people, including those who commit serious crimes, deserve a justice system that takes their actions seriously enough to demand genuine change, not just superficial compliance. That's what justice requires. Anything less is neither justice deferred nor justice achieved. It's simply justice denied. So again, this case remains ongoing. Information is based on public court records that I gave you, news reports, and victim statements as of October of 2025. Updates will emerge, and we'll see if there's anything to cover as we go. I hope you guys enjoyed the content. As always, guys, check out the other stuff because we do cover a lot here, a different perspective than you'll get mostly elsewhere. I'll work with the Kata Scott case. That's going to take a while. I'll try to get someone on that's willing to sit down with me and have this whole dialogue, because there's a lot there. That was longer than this one. Then to have a guest involved, that's going to even be longer, but it's trying to cover everything in one shot. So, sometimes things can't wait. So, as always, guys, stay safe.